17 years. That's how long it's been since my father slammed the heavy oak door in my face, the deadbolt clicking into place with a finality that echoed through my entire life. 17 years of absolute silence, of absence so complete. It became its own presence, a ghost that followed me through basic training, across deserts, into command centers, and now, here, to this crystal chandeliered ballroom where my younger brother Ryan is getting married. 17 years of carrying rejection like a second rucksack, heavier than any gear I've ever humped through the Hindu Kush, and there he is, 2 rows ahead of me, sitting ramrod straight in his chair, shoulders squared like he still owns every room he enters. Marcus Colton, retired Command Sergeant Major Marcus Colton, the man who once told me that daughters were decorations, not defenders. His hair is silver now, the military buzz cut gone softer with age, but that jaw, that impossible, unyielding jaw, is set in the exact same line of disapproval I remember from my childhood. He hasn't changed. Not really, just aged into his bitterness more comfortably. I wasn't planning to speak to him, wasn't planning anything except showing up, supporting Ryan, raising one glass to the happy couple, and slipping away before the old ghosts could corner me. But ghosts don't wait for permission. They don't RSVP. They simply appear, usually at the worst possible moment, wearing the face of the people who broke you. He turns just slightly enough for his voice to carry back toward me on the wine-heavy air, but not so much that it would appear he's actually addressing me directly. That would be too much acknowledgement, too much dignity. His lips curl into that familiar sneer, the one I used to see in my nightmares, eyes glinting with the same cold steel he once used to inspect my brother's Boy Scout uniform while ignoring my straight-A report cards. If it weren't for Ryan's pity, he murmurs, just loud enough for the people around us to hear, no one in this family would have invited you. 5 words. Actually, it's 9 words, but it feels like 5 because they cut that deep. Even after 17 years of combat deployments, of watching soldiers die in my arms, of making decisions that cost lives but saved thousands, his voice still finds the soft tissue of my insecurities. I can feel heads turning, cousins I haven't seen since I was a teenager, great aunts who whisper about that poor girl who ran off, Ryan's law school friends who know there's a story but not the details. The whispers flutter through the reception hall like moths to a flame, drawn to the drama of a father who publicly shames his own daughter. But me? I lift my glass of Cabernet, take a slow, deliberate sip, and smile. Not the fake smile I used to plaster on when he'd lecture me about being unladylike for wanting to join ROTC. Not the wounded smile I'd give my mother when she'd beg me to just try to understand your father. This is a real smile. The kind that comes from knowing what's coming next, from holding a secret so powerful, makes you giddy. Because I already know what's about to happen. I know it the way I know my own heartbeat, the way I know the weight of my service pistol on my hip, the way I know the sound of a Chinook helicopter coming in hot for a medevac, the bride Sophia, my brother's new wife, this brilliant cardiac surgeon who Ryan met when he was defending a hospital merger and she was testifying about patient care, walks to the center of the dance floor. The DJ hands her a wireless microphone, its black head gleaming under the chandelier light. Her cheeks are flushed with champagne and joy, but there's something else there too. A determination that makes her look almost warrior-like in her ivory gown. She pauses, glancing toward me with a look that we rehearsed last night over the phone, while Ryan was at his bachelor party. Her eyes lock onto mine, and I give her the subtlest nod, then she speaks, her voice firm and clear, echoing off the marble walls and the crystal and the shocked faces of my family. Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have your attention for just one moment before we continue the celebration, the string quartet fades. The clinking of silverware stops. 200 people turn toward her, this woman they've just welcomed into the family, unaware she's about to detonate the foundation that family was built on. It is my profound honor tonight Sophia continues, her voice gaining strength with each word, to recognize someone who has given more to this country than most of us could ever imagine. Someone whose sacrifice and service have shaped not just my husband's life, but the lives of thousands. Someone who, despite being told she'd never amount to anything more than a disappointment, rose to become one of the highest-ranking women in our armed forces. She turns fully toward me now, the spotlight finding me like a target acquisition. Please rise, she says, her voice ringing with authority that would make any drill instructor proud, and join me in welcoming Major General Alexandra Colton. The room stills completely. You could hear a champagne bubble pop and break. Then, chairs scrape against the hardwood, first one, then 3, then 20. Feet shuffle, people stand, and then applause thunders through the hall, rolling like artillery fire, a standing ovation in the middle of a wedding reception for the woman their patriarch just publicly humiliated. My brother Ryan freezes, his champagne flute halfway to his mouth, eyes wide with shock and sudden understanding. My father's face drains of all color, going from ruddy self-righteousness to ash gray in 3 seconds flat. That was the moment. The moment I'd carried like a live grenade for 17 years, waiting not for revenge, but for recognition. Not from him, I'd stopped needing that a decade ago, but from them. From this family that had erased me from photo albums and Christmas cards and wedding invitations, that had pretended I didn't exist because my existence challenged everything my father believed about a woman's place. You probably want to know how I got here. How the girl who once ironed her father's uniforms with trembling hands became the woman introduced as Major General Alexandra Colton at the wedding where she wasn't supposed to matter. How a daughter, disowned for daring to dream of service, became a leader that soldiers would follow into hell. So let me take you back. Let me show you the map of this journey, because every battlefield, internal and external, has coordinates, and I remember every single one. I grew up in a house where discipline wasn't just encouraged. It was the air we breathed. Our home in Fairfax Station, Virginia, was a brick colonial that looked like every other house on the cul-de-sac, but inside it was a different world. A world where shoes had to be lined up at a perfect 45-degree angle by the door, where dinner was served at precisely 1800 hours and not a minute later, where beds were made with hospital corners so sharp you could cut yourself, and where my father's word was law in a way that would make a dictator blush. My father, retired Command Sergeant Major Marcus Colton, was a man carved from something harder than stone, maybe depleted uranium, maybe pure stubbornness. He believed in rank, order, and respect. The respect in his dictionary only ever flowed one way, up the chain of command, which meant toward him, and never down, which meant toward his children. To him, sons were legacy bearers, carriers of the family name and military tradition. Daughters? Daughters were supposed to stand quiet at the edges of rooms, be polite, be unseen, be grateful for the privilege of existing in the shadow of greatness. I was 10 the first time he told me I'd never wear the uniform. We were watching the Veterans Day parade on base, soldiers marching in perfect formation, brass gleaming in the autumn sunlight, flags snapping in the breeze. I was sitting on his shoulders, my small hands clutching his head, and I said, "Daddy, I want to do that one day. I want to be like them." He didn't even look up at me, just kept his eyes on the marching troops and muttered, "Leave the uniform to men who can handle it, Lexi. You stick to making sure those uniforms are pressed and ready." I remember my throat tightening, that familiar burn behind my eyes that I had to swallow down. I learned early that tears weren't currency in our house. They didn't buy comfort or understanding. They only bought lectures about weakness and emotional fragility. So I didn't cry. I never did. Instead, I stored that moment away like ammunition, packing it deep in the magazine of my memory where it wouldn't jam when I needed it most. Still, I didn't stop dreaming. I studied his old field manuals when he wasn't looking, memorizing rank insignia and chain of command structures. I learned to shine boots until I could see my face reflected in the leather, perfect and distorted. I practiced marching in the backyard when everyone was asleep, using the cracks in the patio as my guide. He never noticed, or maybe he did and chose to ignore it, hoping that if he didn't acknowledge my ambition, it would starve and die like a plant without water. By the time I was 17, I knew I'd apply to West Point. I'd already mailed the forms in secret, using my friend Jenna's address so the thick envelope wouldn't arrive at our house where my father could intercept it. The night I finally told him, the night I worked up the courage to lay the acceptance letter on the kitchen counter like a treaty I hoped he'd sign, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't throw things. He just stood there, staring at the black and gold seal like I'd placed a live snake on his granite countertop. Then he walked to the front door, opened it wide, and said, "You want to be a soldier? Fine. Start by surviving without me. Get out." Just like that. No emotion, no regret. Just the same flat delivery he'd used to order a subordinate to clean a latrine. My mother, Catherine, begged him to reconsider. She was a high school English teacher, a woman with chalk-stained fingers and a bookshelf filled with poetry that she'd whisper to me at night when my father was on duty. She'd sit on the edge of my bed and recite Emily Dickinson like scripture. "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul." Her voice was a lullaby that carried me past the rigid silence of the rest of the house. But the moment the front door opened and my father stepped in, hope folded its wings and hid. That night, as I stood in the doorway with my single duffel bag, the same bag he'd given me for a camping trip I'd never wanted to go on, the smell of his cigars still clinging to my clothes, I looked at Ryan, my little brother, 15 years old and caught between his hero worship of our father and his love for me. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but our father's glare silenced him. I met Ryan's eyes filled with apology, with helplessness, with the knowledge that he was choosing the easier path, and I stepped into the October night. The door slammed behind me, the deadbolt clicking with a sound that would echo in my dreams for years. The first weeks were brutal. I slept on Jenna's couch until her parents gently suggested I find somewhere else. I worked double shifts at a 24-hour diner near the highway, coming home at a.m. with grease under my fingernails and enough tips to afford textbooks. When West Point's physical preparation packet arrived, 5-mile runs, pull-ups until failure, obstacle courses, ruck marches with 40 pounds I trained in the dark before dawn, my breath freezing in the Virginia winter air, muscles screaming in languages I didn't know I could speak. I could almost hear my father's voice in the back of my mind. "You'll never make it. You'll be back within a month," begging to go to nursing school. Every push-up was an answer. Every mile was defiance. Every time I wanted to quit, I remembered that door slamming, and I pushed harder. When I arrived at the United States Military Academy for reception day, our day, the summer heat was suffocating. Parents crowded the campus, hugging sons and daughters, snapping photos, wiping away proud tears. My spot on the bleachers sat empty. I told myself it didn't matter. But that night, alone in my bunk in Beast Barracks, I unfolded my acceptance letter again, tracing the words with my finger just to remind myself it was real, that I belonged here whether anyone else believed it or not. The academy was fire and I was forged in it. Cadet life was a crucible. Early morning drills that began before sunrise, endless inspections where senior cadets would find dust on a window ledge that didn't exist, instructors who barked until their voices broke. Some classmates cracked under the pressure, others thrived on it. Me? I endured. I excelled. The men in my class tested me daily, especially in those early months when I was one of only a handful of women in our company. "Hey, Colton," a cadet named Jennings sneered during a field exercise in the rain, mud up to our knees. "Why don't you go back to ironing uniforms? Leave the real soldiering to the men who can handle it." I looked him dead in the eye, water streaming down my face, my rucksack digging into shoulders that were building muscle calluses. "I'll race you to the finish line, Jennings," I said. Loser does winner's guard duty for a month. I beat him by 12 minutes, hauling not just my own gear but a teammate's ruck when he twisted his ankle. They stopped underestimating me after that, at least not out loud. The nickname they gave me was Ghost because I moved so quietly through the challenges, leaving no trace of weakness behind. Letters from home never came. My mailbox stayed empty while others filled theirs with care. Packages of cookies and beef jerky, letters scented with perfume, postcards from family vacations. Until one day in October of my plebe year, a thin envelope appeared. My heart jumped so hard I thought it might bruise my ribs when I saw the Colton name on the return address. I tore it open right there in the mailroom, not caring who saw me. Trembling. It wasn't from my father. It was from Ryan. One line, written in his careful, looping handwriting. Dad says you'll come back when you fail. I hope you don't. I kept that letter folded in the breast pocket of my ACUS, against my heart, through every inspection, every ruck march, every moment I wanted to lie down in the dirt and not get up. It became my talisman, proof that someone, somewhere, still believed in me. My mother tried in her own way. She called the academy once during my cow year, but I missed the call during a sand table exercise. The message she left was short, rushed, her voice soft like always. Stay strong, my little bird. Storms don't last forever. I love you. That was the last time I heard from her for years. By the time I graduated, by the time I stood at attention in my dress gray uniform, saber arch gleaming overhead, diploma in hand, I was no longer the girl who ironed her father's uniforms. I was Second Lieutenant Alexandra Colton, commissioned officer in the United States Army. I searched the crowd out of habit, looking for a face that wasn't there. The ache was sharp, but it didn't crush me. I straightened my spine, saluted the superintendent, and marched forward into my future. Because in that moment, I understood something vital. Family didn't have to be blood. Family could be forged in mud and sweat and shared suffering. The women in my company who'd held my hair while I puked after land nav. The upperclassmen who'd taught me to field strip my rifle blindfolded. The instructor who'd seen something in me I hadn't seen in myself yet. They were my family now. The silence from my father followed me into the Army. First posting, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Long days filled with logistics, training rotations, endless briefings under fluorescent lights that hummed like angry insects. Nights were lonelier, no one waiting at home, no letters tucked under my door, just the weight of command and the responsibility for soldiers who were now my brothers and sisters in arms. But I had a purpose, and purpose was enough, until deployment came, and purpose suddenly had teeth. I can still remember the first time I stepped off a C-130 into the Afghan desert, the heat slapping me like I'd opened a furnace door. Dust filled my lungs, grit crunched between my teeth. Soldiers beside me looked twice my size, their faces hidden behind sunglasses and determination. One of them, a kid from Texas who couldn't have been more than 19, muttered, "What's she doing here?" I pretended not to hear, but I did. I always did. It didn't matter. I wasn't there to prove him wrong. I was there to prove myself right. That's when I realized exile wasn't a punishment. It was preparation. My first firefight happened during a routine convoy escort mission. Transport duty, they called it. Nothing glamorous. Just keep the supply trucks moving and watch for EIDs. But war laughs at plans. We were halfway through a valley when the first shot cracked a sound so sharp it seemed to split the air. Then came the rattling staccato of a K-47 fire from the ridge above us. Contact. Left, someone shouted. Bullets chewed into the convoy, sparking off metal, shattering windshields. I dove behind a rusted shipping container, weapon raised, heart hammering against my plate carrier. Training kicked in short controlled bursts. Count your rounds, communicate. Then I heard it. A scream, not the panicked kind, but the raw, tearing sound of a human body breaking. One of ours was down. I sprinted toward the sound, rounds whizzing past close enough to feel the heat on my neck. Private First Class Martinez lay in the dirt, his leg mangled, blood pooling fast, his face as white as the sand beneath him. "Stay with me, Martinez," I barked, dropping to my knees. "You're not dying today, soldier." My hands moved before my brain caught up. Tourniquet high on the thigh, cinched tight until he bit down on his glove to keep from screaming. Pressure on the femoral wound, one hand slick with blood, the other fumbling for my radio. "Medevac, this is Lieutenant Colton. Grid coordinates follow. We have one urgent surgical. Need immediate extract, over." Gunfire roared again, closer. I pressed harder, my side burning. I hadn't realized shrapnel had torn through my vest. Copper taste filled my mouth. The smell of blood and gunpowder and fear mixed into something I'll never forget. We dragged Martinez 40 yards under fire, each step a miracle of adrenaline and training. When the Black Hawk finally swooped low, rotors chopping the air, I shoved Martinez onto the litter and climbed in after him, keeping pressure on his wound the whole flight. By the time we landed at the forward surgical unit, I was soaked. His blood, my blood, sweat, dust. They wanted me on a stretcher too. I refused. I walked off that bird under my own power, holding Martinez's hand until they wheeled him into surgery. Not because I wasn't in pain, but because I knew the men were watching. That day, I earned a new nickname. Doc. They said I bled green, not red. I didn't care about the name. I cared that Martinez lived. He wrote me a letter years later, after I'd made captain. "Ma'am," it read, "you're the reason my daughter has a father. We named her Lexi after you. She's 10 now and wants to be a soldier just like you." That meant more than any medal they could pin on my chest. But that firefight changed me. Until then, I'd been chasing approval, proving I could belong in a world built by men like my father. After that day, I understood something different. Belonging wasn't given. It was taken, forged in fire and sealed in blood. You didn't earn respect by waiting for it. You commanded it by being the person who runs toward gunfire when everyone else runs away. Back stateside, I buried myself in work, logistics, training, endless briefings. Some officers chase promotions with polished smiles and political maneuvering. Me? I chased competence, excellence, the kind of record that no one could deny, even if they wanted to. And believe me, some wanted to. There was a moment I remember clear as yesterday. A young sergeant under my command froze during a live fire exercise. His hands shook so badly he dropped his weapon. I pulled him aside, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "You're not weak, Sergeant. You're scared. That's different. And fear means you're paying attention. Now use it." He nodded, swallowed hard, and finished the drill. A year later, he sent me an email from deployment. "Ma'am, you're the only officer who ever saw me instead of my mistake." Thank you. That line stayed with me because it was true. I knew what it felt like to be invisible, to have your worth dismissed before you even had a chance to show it. I wasn't going to let that happen to anyone under my command. My reputation grew, not as the loudest voice in the room, but as the one people listened to when things went sideways. The brass above me noticed grudgingly at first, then with increasing respect. Commendations followed. New assignments. I rose from first lieutenant to captain to major. Each new rank should have felt like a victory. Instead, they felt like markers in a marathon I was running alone. I still called home. The phone would ring and ring until the machine picked up. My voice always sounded too small when I left messages. "Dad, it's me. I just pinned captain today." Or "Dad, I was promoted to major." I thought you should know. The silence that answered was louder than any artillery. Later, I heard through one of his old army buddies that he'd torn up the photos I sent. That stung. Still, I kept climbing. By the time I earned the Silver Eagle of a full colonel, I knew the truth. Legacy isn't inherited. It's earned, one choice at a time. And my choices had built something stronger than blood. I'd built myself. The call came on a gray Tuesday morning. I just finished a 5-mile run, sweat still cooling on my skin, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. It was Ryan. His voice was flat, clinical, like he was delivering a closing argument. Mom's in hospice. Pancreatic cancer. She doesn't have long. The world narrowed to a single point of light. I hadn't spoken to him in years, and now he was telling me that the one person who had ever been soft in our house, who had ever whispered poetry to me in the dark, was slipping away. I booked the first flight to Virginia. When I walked into the hospice room, the smell of antiseptic hit me first, sharp, sterile, unforgiving. My mother lay small and pale against white sheets, her hair gone, her skin paper thin, tubes whispering. Beside her, my father stood in the corner, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes unreadable. He didn't move when I entered in my uniform. Mom's hand lifted weakly when she saw me. I rushed to her side, my uniform still wrinkled from travel. She smiled, faintly, her lips cracked but warm. "My little bird," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "You kept flying." She was gone before sunrise the next day. At the funeral, I wore my dress blues, the medals heavy on my chest. My father didn't look at me, not once. He spoke about her kindness, her patience, her loyalty, but his eyes never touched mine. Afterward, I returned to base and waited for a letter, a call, any sign. What came instead was an email, 3 sentences. "The funeral was nice. I hope the army is treating you well. I still don't understand your decision." That was it. No love, no acknowledgement, just the same wall reinforced. I stared at those words until the screen blurred. Then I closed my laptop and went back to work. Because work was the only thing that had never turned its back on me. Around that time, Ryan announced his engagement. He called me personally, his voice careful like he was testing fragile glass. "I want you there, Alex. I need you there." I hesitated, looking at the 4 stars on my shoulder boards. "Does Dad know?" "He does," Ryan admitted. "He's not thrilled. But this isn't about him. It's my wedding. You're my sister. Please." 17 years had passed since that October night. 17 years of distance measured not in miles but in missed birthdays, empty chairs at ceremonies, a mother's funeral where my father pretended I was a stranger. But this was Ryan, the kid who'd once slipped notes under my door after I'd been kicked out. "You're stronger than him." Always were. The boy who'd watched me leave with a duffel bag and eyes full of helpless apology. I said yes. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, memories clawed their way back. The door slamming, the manila folder of nursing school applications he'd tried to force on me, the silence after Mom's death. I trained myself to be ready, to endure his presence the way I'd endured mortar fire and I'd blasts. I told myself, he can't touch you anymore. Not your rank, not your worth, not the soldiers who would follow you into hell. And yet, when the day came, my stomach still nodded as I slipped into my dress uniform. The medals glinted against my chest: Distinguished Service Medal, Bronze Star with V device, Purple Heart, Legion of Merit. Each one a story, a scar, a life saved, or a mission accomplished. I stared at myself in the mirror, 4 stars gleaming on my shoulder, and whispered, "This is who you are." Not his daughter, not his disappointment. A general. The wedding was beautiful. White roses, a string quartet playing Vivaldi, the air thick with celebration and expensive perfume. Ryan looked nervous but happy as he stood at the altar waiting for Sophia. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him, my father. Older now, his hair completely silver, his frame smaller, but his posture just as rigid. Arms crossed, jaw set, that same scowl carved into his face. For a moment, the years fell away and I was that 17-year-old girl again, standing in the living room with an acceptance letter clutched in my hand, begging him to see me. Then he turned, his voice low enough that only I could hear, and he sneered, "If it weren't for pity, no one would have invited you." The words slid under my skin like glass shards, finding old wounds. 17 years and nothing had changed. I lifted my wine glass, took a slow sip, and smiled. Because this time, I knew something he didn't. This time, I wasn't walking into exile. I was walking into reckoning. The reception hall buzzed with laughter and clinking crystal. I sat quietly. At my table, posture straight, uniform crisp. The 4 stars on my shoulder caught the chandelier light, though most of the guests didn't know what they meant. I felt my father's eyes on me like crosshairs. Even after all these years, he still carried himself as if every room were his to command. But the truth was, he had no command here. Not any more. Then the music softened. Sophia walked to the center of the dance floor, microphone in hand, her ivory gown catching the light. She cleared her throat, smiled nervously, and said, "Before we continue tonight, I'd like to take a moment." The room hushed. You could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. "I know weddings are about families coming together," Sophia began, her voice gaining strength. "And tonight, I want to acknowledge someone whose sacrifice and service have shaped not just my husband's life, but this nation. Someone who, despite being told she'd never be more than a disappointment, rose to become one of the highest-ranking women in our armed forces." She turned fully toward me, the spotlight finding me again. "Please rise," she said, her voice ringing with authority, "and join me in honoring Major General Alexandra Colton." For a heartbeat, the room froze. Forks halfway to mouths, glasses suspended mid-air. Then chairs scraped back. People stood. Applause swelled, hesitant at first, then rolling like thunder, a standing ovation in the middle of a wedding for the woman their patriarch just publicly humiliated. I stayed seated for a moment, letting it wash over me. The faces blurred, but I could see one clearly, my father's. His mouth was tight, his knuckles white against the tablecloth. He didn't move, didn't stand. His pride chained him to his chair while everyone else rose to their feet. I finally stood, slow and deliberate, glass still in hand. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing in the silence between claps. I didn't bow, I didn't wave. I simply inclined my head, a soldier's nod of acknowledgement. "Thank you," I said, voice clear but calm. The ovation went on longer than I expected, long enough that I saw people glancing toward my father, waiting for him to rise. He never did, and that was when it hit me. Revenge didn't come in the form of anger or shouting or demanding his respect. Revenge came in the form of silence breaking in a way he couldn't control. Revenge came when an entire room stood for me while he sat alone. Blood didn't stand, but honor did. Afterward, people approached me, guests I'd never met, shaking my hand, thanking me for my service. Some shared stories of fathers, brothers, daughters who'd served. Others simply said they were proud. I smiled politely, responded with gratitude. All the while, I felt the empty gravity of his silence behind me. At one point, I turned. He was still sitting, rigid, refusing to look my way. It didn't matter anymore. The recognition I'd chased my entire life wasn't his to give. It was already mine. Ryan came over later, tugged at his tie. "You okay?" I nodded. "I am." He hesitated. "You deserve that." Every bit of it. For the first time that night, I let myself breathe. Because he was right. The wedding ended the way weddings always do, music fading into laughter, champagne dwindling, guests filing out with shoes in their hands, and ties loosened. I stayed until the end, shaking hands, hugging my brother, watching the joy on his face as he and Sophia left under an arch of sparklers. My father left quietly. No goodbye, no acknowledgement, just a rigid back slipping into the shadows of the parking lot. I thought it would sting more than it did, but the truth was, I felt lighter, because I finally understood. His silence was his burden, not mine. For years, I'd carried the weight of his rejection like a rucksack too heavy to shrug off. I thought if I achieved enough, climbed high enough, earned enough medals, he would finally see me. But in that hall, with strangers standing and applauding while he sat stone still, I realized I didn't need him to see me. The world already did. Weeks later, a letter arrived at my office at the Pentagon. The handwriting was shaky but familiar, his blocky, military print that I'd seen on countless childhood chore lists. I didn't stand because I didn't know how. I don't understand what you've become, but I know it's more than I ever gave you credit for. Your mother would be proud. If you'll allow it, I'd like to talk. Not as soldiers, not as ranks, just as father and daughter. I read it 3 times. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just set it down and sat in silence. That night, I told my husband, David, about it. We'd met during a joint training exercise. He was a Navy SEAL commander who understood what it meant to serve in silence, to have a family that didn't understand the calling. Do you want to see him? David asked gently. I don't know, I admitted. I don't owe him anything. No, he said, pulling me close. But maybe you owe yourself the choice. A month later, I met him at Arlington National Cemetery. Not at a banquet hall, not at some restaurant where we could hide behind small talk, but at my mother's grave. He wore civilian clothes, khakis, and a button-down that hung loose on his smaller frame. He looked like a deflated version of the man I remembered, all the bluster and volume turned down to a whisper. We talked for an hour. Not about wars, not about medals, but about regrets, about silence, about how absence becomes its own kind of cruelty, about the poetry my mother used to read, and how I still hear her voice sometimes in the quiet moments between commands. And when we parted, he did something I'll never forget. He straightened slowly, as if his spine had forgotten how, and raised his hand to his brow in a salute. Not sharp, not perfect, but earnest. It was the first time he'd ever saluted me. I returned it, not because he'd earned forgiveness, he hadn't, but because he had finally chosen truth over pride. The years that followed brought new commands, new responsibilities, but I carried that moment with me, not as vindication, but as proof that even the hardest walls can crack, that even the most stubborn silence can be broken. One day, a young lieutenant, a 23-year-old woman fresh from West Point, asked me what the most important lesson of my career had been. We were in my office at CENTCOM, maps of the world covering the walls, the weight of global responsibility pressing down. I told her this. Respect isn't inherited. It isn't given by blood or rank or title. It's earned by showing up when it's hard, by standing up when you're told to sit down, and by never letting someone else's silence define the volume of your voice. Your father, your family, they may never understand what you become, but the soldiers who follow you, the lives you save, the difference you make, they'll understand, and that's the only recognition that matters. She nodded, eyes bright with the same fire I'd carried at her age. And one more thing, Lieutenant, I said, standing and walking to the window that overlooked the parade field. Never let anyone tell you that your gender is a limitation. My father told me I'd never wear the uniform because I was a girl. Today, I'm one of 5 women in the history of this army to wear 4 stars. Not because I was given anything, but because I took what was mine. She saluted, sharp and perfect, and I returned it with the same quiet pride I learned to carry. Now, as I sit in my study, looking at the photos on my wall, me with presidents, with foreign leaders, with soldiers whose lives I helped save, I think about that wedding, about Sophia's voice ringing through the hall, about my father's face pale and shocked, about Ryan's eyes finally seeing me. I think about the girl I was, ironing uniforms in a Virginia kitchen, dreaming of parades and purpose. I think about the woman I became, bleeding in the dirt of Afghanistan, commanding troops in the desert, earning stripes and scars and stars. I think about my mother, whispering poetry in the dark. Hope is the thing with feathers. She was right. Hope did carry me, but so did rage, so did grief, so did the absolute refusal to let someone else's limited imagination become the boundaries of my life. If you're listening to this, and you've carried silence like a weight, if you've let rejection define you, if you've been waiting for someone to see you stop waiting, stand up. Salute your own reflection. The recognition you seek isn't in someone else's eyes. It's in the mirror. It's in the choices you make when no one is watching. It's in the quiet moments when you decide to keep going anyway. My father kicked me out because he thought I would fail. He mocked me because he thought I would break. He sat silent while a room stood for me because his pride was more important than his daughter. But here's what he didn't know. Every door he slammed in my face just taught me to build my own doors. Every insult he hurled became armor. Every moment of silence just made my voice louder when I finally decided to use it, 17 years after. He told me I wasn't his daughter anymore. I became exactly what he feared. A woman he couldn't control, a soldier he couldn't break, a general he couldn't ignore. The last time I saw him was at his own funeral. He died 2 years ago quietly, in his sleep. No grand battle, no final words of wisdom, just a man who'd lived his entire life inside walls he'd built himself, and who died inside them too. I wore my dress blues. I stood at his graveside while the honor guard fired their rifles, and when they handed me the folded flag, when that triangle of red, white, and blue was placed in my hands by a young sergeant whose hands trembled with respect, I didn't cry for the father I'd lost. I cried for the father he'd never let himself become, because in the end, the only person his pride truly punished was him. He missed watching his daughter become a warrior. He missed seeing his son marry a woman of substance. He missed the chance to evolve, to grow, to understand that legacy isn't about controlling the next generation, it's about giving them the strength to fly higher than you ever did. So if you're carrying rejection from someone who was supposed to love you unconditionally, I want you to hear this. Their inability to see your worth is not a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of their blindness. You are not the small, scared person they tried to make you believe you were. You are the person who survived their cruelty. You are the person who built a life without their approval. You are the person who stood in a room full of strangers and earned their respect not because of your name, but because of your actions. You are Major General Alexandra Colton. You are the girl who ironed uniforms and became the woman who commands armies. You are the daughter who was told she'd never wear the colors, and who now wears for stars. You are the reckoning they never saw coming. And you, listening to this, you are whatever you decide to be, not what they told you to be, not what they said you could never be. So stand up, straighten your spine, look in the mirror and salute the person looking back at you, because that person, they've been through hell and came out the other side wearing armor made of scars and stars. That person is you, and you are magnificent.